Have you ever heard the name Colbert King? Colbert King is a flaming liberal newspaper columnist for Pravda on the Potomac, better known as the Washington Post. I've emailed the fellow a few times on some of his outlandish columns. I can tell you he does not like me, or at least his responses pointed that out, that he didn't have a lot of use for me. And the feeling is mutual. On the other hand, over the weekend, when you see someone of that political stripe with a column with this headline, Clinton email scandal, why it might be time for Democrats to draft Joe Biden. It's beginning to, they can only ignore it for so long. The fellow travelers in media have been saying there's nothing to see here, there's nothing to see here, there's no big deal. Those four men who got killed in Benghazi, they deserved it, and their families are all liars. And there's nothing to see when it comes to her email situation and her 2,600 or so classified emails on her home server, which were likely hacked by the Chinese, the Russians, the North Koreans, and anybody else out there who doesn't like. There's nothing. Go away now. There's nothing to take a look at here. There is nothing trivial, he writes, about a Secretary of State having top secret information on an unsecured computer in her home. That appears to have been the case based on the State Department's announcement last week that 22 emails across 7 email chains containing top secret information were on Hillary Clinton's private email server. The important non-political question, did the nation's top diplomat or her State Department staff improperly handle extremely sensitive top secret information and do so in a manner in which the information could be compromised? State Department rules are quite clear. Now, it's not a hanging offense, but it is one that could send her off to a lockup for a long, long time if she's convicted. Meanwhile, The Hill is another liberal publication from Washington. The Hill is reporting this morning that Loretta Lynch may have to recuse herself and step aside and appoint a special prosecutor once the FBI comes forward and there is enough material to indict the former Secretary of State and, as the media calls her, the Democratic frontrunner for President of the United States. In other words, the Attorney General of the U.S. might have some associations here that could be compromising and would have to step aside and let someone else look into all of this while Mrs. Clinton is running for president, which, as you know, could be devastating for her campaign and could be devastating for Democrats because the only other person currently, and he's going to win in New Hampshire tomorrow, is the socialist, yes, the Marxist-Leninist Bernie Sanders. And if he ends up as the nominee, well, then the Dems can kiss their bottoms goodbye this November. Not that a lot of us are upset about that. It might actually be a good thing for the country to finally expunge all of the big spending socialists and get a little bit more rationale back into government when it comes to overblown spending. 10 minutes after 9 o'clock, Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. I got bad news for you, lefties. Your girl is going to prison. In fact, Ted Cruz making some comments about this while he was campaigning yesterday in the Granite State, that is New Hampshire.
The folks here understand cause and effect. You understand that every time we do what we're doing now, out of control spending and taxes and regulation, you get what we got now: misery and stagnation and malaise. And by the way, what do Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders promise? More of the same. I actually am surprised that there is not a Democratic debate tonight during the Super Bowl. But there is good news. They've announced the location of the next Democratic debate. They're hosting it at Leavenworth. They wanted to make it easier for Hillary to attend.
Touche. Ted Cruz is, again, speaking yesterday in New Hampshire. The crack about holding a debate during the Super Bowl, at the moment, the Democrats have tried to hide their debates on obscure networks on obscure nights so that no one can see just how bad these two candidates actually happen to be. The two of them. What is it? Someone made the crack the other day. It was like watching a couple of grandparents fight over where they're going to have their breakfast at, Bob Evans or over at IHOP. 912, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Telephone number to reach our program this morning, 736-0300, 736-0300. Meanwhile, Mrs. Clinton's dog, her husband, dogs are usually in heat, running around various places. Mr. Clinton, William Jefferson Clinton, speaking in favor of his wife, mocked the Benghazi hearings that took place a few months ago.
They had this 11-hour hearing. I venture to say no figure in American public life could have stood up to that for 11 hours and batted back everything and never lost their temper and showed us what a president's supposed to do. Everybody knows this whole thing is hokum, but email sounds so bad.
I'll tell you, I just want to tell you, if she goes off to prison, I don't know what I'll do. I guess I'd find me a girlfriend. Or a couple of dozen. That means I'd have to give off a couple of hundred. 912, Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Telephone number to reach our program this morning, 736-0300, 736-0300. You're up next. You're on News Radio 1310 KLIX and online at newsradio1310.com.
Good morning, Bill. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I was wondering if you could give me, because I don't know where I stand, to be honest with you, and I was wondering if I could get your nutshell definition of liberal versus conservative.
Nutshell. Look, I don't know that a lot of people who call themselves conservative any longer are actually conservative, because we've seen big government conservatives pretty much dominate the scene in Washington, as well as big government liberals for the last 15 years. I just think a good, solid conservative is the person who learns how to say no. When we heard Randy Staples talking about expanding health care in the last half hour of the program, the reason it hasn't been expanded is because there are still a few true conservatives in Boise who are saying no, and they don't do it because they're mean. They do it because they know that we can't spend ourselves into oblivion.
Right. It's a sensible thing to do. And so a liberal on the other side would be one who is just frivolously spending, let's pass this bill, yes, on everything.
Years ago, I was watching a PBS series called, I think it was called The Last Liberals, and it was about Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon, because domestically, Richard Nixon was defined very much as a liberal, creating the EPA and a lot of other agencies, and which cost the country a lot of money. And there was one of Johnson's aides who said when they had the Great Society come along, and they created program after program after program, he said, and you know what? We never once asked ourselves how we were going to pay for all of this. It made them feel good, and they knew they would get votes, but they never really, and this fellow even admitted, they never even considered the costs and how they were going about covering those costs.
Righto.
Hey.
Well, it gives me a little clarity. Maybe I'm on one side of the fence or the other now. I appreciate your input.
Thank you. That's the argument that it's mean-spirited not to go out and spend the country into oblivion. And last week when we mentioned that the country has now crossed that this is the official number, $19 trillion in debt. Now, unofficially, George Will had a column a few years ago where he said the figure could be as high as $131 trillion, because you have local governments and state governments that have promised pensions to retirees that they can never afford to pay. And they've gone ahead and said, not only that, when you retire, we're going to pay for all of your health care benefits as well, which we will never be able to cover. So if you add in all of those figures, and once more, most of us, we can't even conceive of $1 million. $1 billion is 1,000 million. $1 trillion is 1,000 billion. We are officially, nationally, the national debt, $19 trillion now. The Congressional Budget Office says it is going to be $30 trillion in a decade. And that's probably a conservative estimate, not in a political sense, but conservative in a spending sense estimate of where it's going to be. Simply put, any country that is that much in debt has no future any longer. And to sit here and say it's mean-spirited not to give everybody the candy bar when they want one, I'm sorry, but in another 20 years, when we will be able to provide nothing for anyone, not even building tanks and planes to defend ourselves, what do you think is going to be worse for the country? You're up next. You're on the air on KLIX.
Good morning.
Morning. What's on your mind?
Okay, I hate to drag you back to abortion, but just please comment and tell me where I'm wrong. I'm against abortion. Here's the but until science has got us, medical science has got us to the point in which the fetus baby can live outside the womb, it's a moral issue. Unless we're willing to put women in prison, for one, if they caught smoking, two, if they miss their doctor's appointments, or we catch them drinking a cup of wine.
Well, here's a question for you. If you have you have a 1-year-old baby, you can say, all right, it lives outside the womb. Go out into the high desert, maybe out into the South Hills, set it down on a hillside and leave it there for 3 days in the middle of January. Can that 1-year-old survive?
No.
I think we've just answered the question about moral issue here and where life actually begins. You're up next. You're on the air. It's 9:18. We've got 28.
I suggest you check in with a few economists because ever since trickle-down economics, that's when all this deficit began under Ronald Reagan. All these trickle-down economics, giving tax breaks to the rich and not paying for nothing, and have the little people like right here. Notice how right after they doubled the registration and all that tax, still potholes everywhere. There's nothing, and now they're taking $16 million off of the ISP for the roads too. So it's
did anybody get that? Ronald Reagan is responsible for this. The man's been dead now for how long, and he's been out of office for how long? Yeah, I think we I'll tell you what. It's sometimes the cultural transition just doesn't set well with people. But when you come from a narco-terrorist state, you just sell more cocaine to pay the bills. You're up next. You're on the air. We've got about a minute before the break.
Quickly, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton took credit for what Ronald Reagan did. And, it's proven. And it's not hard to figure out if you just decide to actually read the facts. Okay, that's over with. Until we see a country
wars cost money. Reagan was in the Cold War, and he defeated the enemy. And unfortunately, they had to borrow to do that, just like we borrowed in World War II. But go ahead.
Well, quickly, there was two countries that were in very bad shape. I think it was Iceland and Greece. Greece decided to put it off, kick the can down the road. Iceland decided to do what was necessary, either Greenland or Iceland, whatever one it was. Probably Greenland. I don't know. And it doesn't matter. But right now, Iceland or Greenland has squared themselves away. They're fiscally responsible. Their economy is going, and Greece is still languishing in delusion. See, you see, Greece, as long as they keep bailing them out, I guess everybody that thinks this thing can continue on, I guess we'll see. I guess we need to see what it will actually happen to a country that literally goes bankrupt and whatever that would mean. And I'll hang up.
Hey, thank you. And yes, the United States being much larger than Greece, you can imagine that sinking boat is going to create it's going to take down a lot of smaller boats with it. 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you. Hey, looking forward to some warmer weather later this week.